It is important to be mindful that we would not be here if it were not for the generosity of what here and so. There's so much gratitude that we are about. And also to be mindful that over the thousands and thousands of years, this very spot has been changed over time and continues to change. And part of the history or whatever, this is the legacy of the Chumash people were here long before us, and we here for thousands of years. And I think we can honor their legacy of being stewards of the land, but one of the ways that in our lives we can carry on the legacy of being stewards. This land we live in. The other thing that occurred to me is maybe my reading also is that every moment of our lives is an opportunity to deepen our practice. Writing and preparing for these talks is a difficult process. And there's this thing in Zen about having an iron ball that you can either spit out or swallow. And that's kind of how I feel. Or as Prabhupada says, it's like if you get a very hot dumpling and you put it in your mouth and you can't spit it out, but you want to keep it. So it's with humbleness that I present this. I talk. I realized there's always a point where I just have to stop and just be happy with what I have and accept the results. So the title of this talk is Why We Feel Separate from the Buddhas. To know there are Buddhas in the world does not necessarily mean that you recognize the Buddha within. To be apart from your own Buddha nature is to be apart from all Buddhas. How can you realize the connection with yourself and all Buddhas unless you have already to some degree recognized the Buddha within? We may even recognize ourselves as a Buddha within and yet still feel apart from our own Buddha nature. It may be that you're projecting the Buddha nature onto the world, but once again, how would you even recognize the Buddha without? If you are not in some way already met with the Buddha within. To the extent you realize your Buddha nature is the extent to which you will feel connected to all Buddhas throughout space and time. I entertained the thought and the belief that for most of my life that Siddhartha attained full Buddhahood when he became enlightened, as if you were a human version of a caterpillar that went through a metamorphosis and became a Buddha avatar. The very idea of a person changing into a Buddha is flawed thinking. Shakyamuni Buddha did not attain full Buddhahood when he became enlightened. He was already Buddha. He did not transform some type of non-Buddha nature into Buddha nature through some alchemical process. He did not transform himself to a non-attained Buddha to an attained Buddha. The countless Buddhas before him and the ones that had come after him also did not attain Buddha. They already were Buddhas. Like all Buddhas throughout space and time, you cannot attain Buddhahood in a manner of some metamorphic transformation within you. We are already Buddha and one with all Buddhas. Trying to become more Buddha is like a fish trying harder to be a fish, or a human trying to be more human. It's not a matter of changing who we are, but revealing to ourselves who we already are, who our essential selves what we are. That is the purpose of practice, to reveal our true selves to ourselves. Practice is not becoming a Buddha or achieving enlightenment. Becoming implies changing from one thing to another, that transformation. Achieving, similarly, implies that something is missing that we need to accomplish something else. Like struggling to achieve a goal can become so entangled in the dramas of our lives that we may come to believe there's no way out from the messes we often find ourselves in. Knowing that a life lived in samsara is a dead end opens us up to the possibility that there's some other way to be in the world. Sometimes we might hear or read something from a different point of view that offers a new path in our lives away from suffering. The message that there is a path other than endless striving for what we do not have is a relief. In his commentary on Case 9, on the Gate to Escape, Babu addresses our feelings and thinking that we are hopelessly flawed and incomplete. He writes, but the truth is that with your shortcomings, knowledge, and experiences, you are perfect just as you are. It is not that you look perfect or have no vexations or flaws, but that you are perfect with these flaws, perfect with these limitations. For most of us, this is not easy to believe, especially in the culture we live in. From a young age, we have been taught that we should do something with our lives, that we should become someone unique and noteworthy. We may even have been told that it is in fact our obligation to become a better person so we can benefit the rest of society. These beliefs are so ingrained in our psyches that to believe we are whole just as we are seems a bit naive. Lao Tzu would not have us believe that just recognizing that we are perfect the way we are is all we must do to be at peace. He knows there's much work to do that involves working with the very afflictions we would like to get rid of. He writes, all the things that manifest in you, all of these reactions are what practice is about. Amid all of these challenges and imperfections, you learn to discover how to be at peace. And through practice, as pointed out earlier in Mada's book, our Buddha nature manifests itself little by little in the process of time. At first, our practice may be driven mostly by faith. We can imitate the ways of Buddhas, chant sutras, dress in robes, and act the way Buddhas are supposed to act. We can help other people, we can give them clothing, and help them find the places to live, and do all the things we imagine a Buddha would do. But of course, these actions alone will not make us a Buddha. This is seeking for answers outside us. Even though from the outside, our lives may look exactly like the life of a Buddha, we would not be a Buddha. We must realize the Buddha within to be fully one with all Buddhas. We may try to act like a Buddha because we want to be a Buddha, not realizing we already are Buddhas. This is looking for the Buddha outside of itself. Buddhist liturgy is full of ritual that invokes our Buddha nature to appear. We can take part in these rituals and not truly apprehend their meaning. For instance, in Jukai ceremony, there is the ritual of Buddhas bowing to Buddha. We can participate in this ritual and just go through the motion of being a participant, acting the role of a Buddha, bowing to a Buddha, without appreciating that indeed one is a Buddha, bowing to another Buddha. But rituals are expression of what is, whether the participants truly understand the significance of the ritual. The time as we participate in these rituals, we come to apprehend the meaning. The ritual is important, even though we may not grasp the significance of the ritual at the moment. It may be many times that you take part in the Jukai ritual before you truly realize Buddhas are actually bowing to Buddha. We might accept that we have Buddha nature, but not really believe it in our hearts. With all of our flaws as humans, with the knowledge that we break the precepts over and over again, we might believe we will not awaken to our true nature. At first, our belief that we have Buddha nature may just be, as I said above, an act of faith. We accept the teachings from our teachers with little understanding, but we still accept the teachings. We know being human comes with many flaws. We feel that there's a gulf between who we are and realizing our Buddha nature. We may even realize in the world of appearances, we are the same as Buddha. contemporary philosopher of his time who inquired about his method. The Buddha said, when we walk, we walk. When we eat, we eat. The philosopher said, what's so special about that? Everyone does that. Yes, the Buddha answered, but when we walk, we know we are walking. When we eat, we know we are eating. From the point of view of the outside observer, the two people walking look the same, but the one aware of his walking is different from the other who's not aware of his walking. To move toward Buddhahood in this example is to learn to be in the present moment. When going about your life activities, there is nothing that this person needs to add or take away from his life, but there needs to be a shift of attention that moves this ordinary person toward awakening. We can realize our Buddha nature despite our flaws. We can be Buddhas without first ridding ourselves of our shortcomings or becoming a better person. Well, Buddha points out in the same commentary mentioned above, it is not that your vexations and habit tendencies are perfect, but your true nature is. It is like the water in a cup. Its nature or essence, wetness, is the same whether the water is dirty or clean. The point is not to strive to clean up our characters so we can realize our true nature. Even if we worked on this for eons, we would remain the same as we began, human beings. We would still have all the shortcomings we had when we started. At the same time, believing we need to do nothing because we're perfect is to miss the point. pure Buddha nature. So we go back and we sit again so that our minds can settle. As we practice and learn to sit and clear our minds, the vexations and troubles of our lives settle and drop away. While the Buddha writes, if you can put to rest your attachments to your constructs, your stories of this and that, which give rise to craving and aversion, then you will be at peace. To be free from aversion is to realize that awakening or Buddhahood is already perfected. So when we return to our daily lives and our minds become disturbed and clouded again by the challenges we face to face, there's always practice to go back to. Finding quiet moments from our hectic lives, we take opportunities to practice they perceive like the Nazis as being these rhinoceros that go through, but as they harden against them, they become rhinoceros. They become backwards that they found so repugnant. And so the challenge, I think, of our world is how do you, I think, how do you live in this world so that you can stay and still work toward your human nature, but still be in the world, still not go to sleep, not, I mean, that's different who's going to go to the movies? You know, who's going to go watch the exciting movie or do these exciting things if people are content? So that makes our lives extra difficult because that is what we're up against. And I actually, for me, I advocate people censoring what you watch. You know, we are human beings, and human beings, I don't care who you are, you're going to be influenced by television if you watch television. If you think you can watch TV or not, maybe you're good at that point. I mean, if you're really deep, you can. But I'm not. And it's the same thing with news. You know, you watch the news sensationalizes, the people on the news sensationalize what is happening in the world. You listen to their tone of voice. They're trained to have an edge to their voice so that you feel, you can't help but feel emotionally involved in the news. It's very rare. There's a very few news outlets that are they just tell you the news. So there's a sensationalization of the news. And that feeds everything. It feeds Donald Trump. It feeds everything. It feeds the people who don't like Donald Trump because the newscasters have an underlying emotion that you shouldn't like this guy. So instead of being able to calm down and see things and say, he's a very unhappy man. You know, from all reports of people who ever are with, he's just a very unhappy, angry person. And his base are people who are very angry and unhappy. And he is a way for them to like Wu says, that the common person sees everything outside themselves and blames everything outside themselves. And these people find a comfort in being able to find something to blame other than look inside themselves. I think so often we don't want to look deeply into somebody like Donald Trump. And what is this person? Why does he act the way he does? Why do these people who are attractive act the way they do? They're fundamentally unhappy people. They're fundamentally angry. They're fundamentally disturbed. That came from somewhere. That came through their upbringing, one way or the other. Something in their childhood and development later on. They're very hurt, damaged people. And this is the way they lash out. When you start from that point of view, then yes, they're still there, and we need to push back against that. But there's a difference between pushing back with compassion and standing in the ground of compassion, and one where you're just getting as angry as they are, and disturbed as they are. That's just my point. That's how I see it.
I have always tried to find, I shouldn't say always, I've been trying to find the middle ground, and every time that upheaval happens, there's, if it's close to you, it's really hard to find that middle ground. There's no peace when someone's voting against you and you don't have the freedom to act peaceful. I don't know that the people of Falun Gong in China who basically are harvested for their organs have peace. And I don't know that the type of Buddhists in China have a choice to be that type of Buddhist, or here now, in Iran, actually, no one has the freedom to be Buddhist. change to Buddhism, and they have to travel and act like they've always been Buddhist, and maybe they're still targets, but now this is turning around here, and this is what's happening here. A month ago, as I was at work with a new patient, and there's a congressman in our building who had a bomb threat, so all of us had to evacuate. And I was glad that I didn't have needles in people, having to remove them to go stand. At that time it was cold, and this frail little women were shaking, and we had to be outside the building. And so how do you find the middle ground when it's close to you? There's really, when you're treating the person that got abused by a person that was abused, at some point it doesn't matter that they were abused. They're just there doing wrong, and when is that just anger? Is there anything as just anger? Is there anything that we can do as Buddhists that can be helpful um, to help these people that are being abused?
Yeah, once again, I can only respond from my point of view. I think what you can do to help people that is to be calm. First of all, is to be. There are myriad ways that our lives can be horrific. In the time of the Buddha, these things were happening when he was alive. It's very similar. And I can only speak to what I've experienced, because I think for myself, there are so many stories of horrific things I've been through. And it may be, it's like you said, we don't know. It's beyond knowing. But also I think part of it for me is accepting whether I like it or not. That is the world we live in. And it's always been the way the world is. But it doesn't mean that, I don't know how to put this. It means, if nothing else, we should be extra grateful when we don't suffer. To really appreciate where we are. And at the same time, there have been people who've been through very horrific pain, and for some reason have been Prabhu is